indicator you think we'll need to do sanitation marketing? I'll give it a minute, and then I might ask one person to share a little bit about why you think this indicator is important to measure. Don't lie. Type your indicator. There's no right or wrong answers. Okay, we've got demand for toilet up on the chat box. You could be more specific. What is the actual indicator you would use to measure demand for toilets? Got one from TD, from the group. Got one more, consumer satisfaction with products. I want to have it typing an indicator you think you'll need to measure SanMark. From Emily, percentage of the poorest households purchasing sanitation products. And one from Dave, the number of families defecating in open and requesting for a home toilet. So as I'm logging in, I don't see any new people logging in, but as we're waiting, maybe just give someone an opportunity. Would anyone like to share a little bit about why you think the indicator in the chat box is important and how you think you would measure it? So you can raise hands, and Emily will give mic, unless Emily want to share. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Dave, do you want to go ahead and share a little bit with us why you think this indicator is important? If we can have Mike.
Your mic, Dave? Your mic's open. I think we're having problems hearing you. If you can type in the chat box instead.
Okay. Sorry, Dave. We seem to be having some technical problems, but if you want to type in the chat box why you think that indicator is important. And just one more coming in from Ian. The number of families in unregulated or squatter settlements. The reason why is because this will be the most challenging to get to invest resources in sanitation upgrades. Dave, if you go ahead and type in the chat box, and then we might get started on the formal session. So it sounds like some good, interesting responses. And today we're going to be talking a lot more on some indicators we need to measure. So I might pass over to Therese and we'll get started.
Great, thanks so much, Danielle, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone, wherever you may be. This is the fourth of our learning clinics, and it's really going to be a little bit more like a WebEx session rather than our traditional learning clinics, because we'd really like to focus on monitoring and evaluation. So today Danielle is going to take us through some discussions on how we can measure sanitation marketing progress, what it's all about, give us some tips as to what we should or shouldn't include, and also see where it maybe is linked to our ongoing monitoring under CATS and MORES. So without further ado, over to you, Danielle. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Therese. So as Therese has mentioned, we're going to be looking a little bit more at some common indicators for measuring sanitation marketing progress and the frameworks and tools that we would use to track some of these indicators. And then we'll look a little bit about at tips that UNICEF can think about as you integrate new SanMark indicators into your existing monitoring framework. Please know if you're having any trouble hearing me. So where are we at in the 7-step framework? Well, this session and next session on operationalizing SanMark within CATS is really steps 6 and 7. So we're assuming we've gone through and we've developed really strong sanitation marketing strategy, the products and the promotional and communications tools that we'll need, and we're ready to roll out and scale up our SanMark work and measure what's happening within our program. So measuring sanitation marketing within MORES. Just to quickly recap, so we're all on the same page. As we know, the goal of CATS is about eliminating all open defecation. In sanitation marketing, the goals are a little bit different. We're looking at increasing uptake and sustained use of improved sanitation at household level. We want to reach everyone, but we recognize in SanMark that it's more of an incremental approach. So the goal involves household level investment decisions. In SanMark, we also have a supply side goal was related to increasing market availability of affordable and desirable improved sanitation products and services. So these core goals will really define what it is we track and measure in our programs. So in the UNICEF monitoring results for equity systems or MORES, what I'm here on this slide is just to map the key sanitation marketing objectives to the MORES dimensions. And you can see that the SanMark objectives map pretty well to MORES. I'm not an expert on UNICEF MORES, but I understand it's really a tool to help UNICEF CEOs assess bottlenecks and barriers, and also enabling factors that can help make sure that UNICEF activities are reaching those most in need, so that activities are reaching the poorest and most disadvantaged children. So sanitation marketing objectives are related to, can map very well to MORES dimensions. As you can see, there'll be an objective around improve the market ecosystem under the enabling environment. We're looking at improving supply and increasing consumer demand. For the remainder of this presentation, we'll look at the fourth MORES dimension, quality, as a subset of the supply dimension. So in terms of what we're going to measure in SanMark, well, we're really looking at 2 units of analysis. The first one is not a surprise. We'll look at households and communities to measure some of those access and behavioral outcomes. So these are, changes in households, improve the training ownership, installation, purchase, and usage. So these indicators are fairly standard already within sanitation programs, and they shouldn't require creating new frameworks, and we think there's a lot of opportunity to incorporate these into your existing village level and CATS monitoring. But SanMark does add a new dimension to sanitation work, which is fairly new and might require some new frameworks and tools. This relates to business activities. So we need to, if we're intervening at the house on the supply side, we need to know if our interventions are working. We need to understand if private businesses are expanding supply, if they're responding to new demand, and we need to know what continued bottlenecks are preventing businesses from reaching our target segments, which will be the poorest. So we will need some new tools there. Finally, there is this third dimension, which we'll call the market ecosystem. This is the new roles and functions of the different market facilitators, particularly local government, that will be involved in sanitation marketing. So go back to our guidance note 6 and our earlier discussions on who might do what. Well, once we've kind of mapped out these roles and functions, we'll need to make sure people, these different actors, are doing well what they should be doing. So, of course, assessing these broader market ecosystem factors is all about understanding programmatically if we've got a scalable, sustainable set of activities, if external support can be phased out over time, and also how cost-effective our interventions are. So a lot of this will already be covered in your existing enabling environment frameworks and under MORES, but we might need to add some new dimensions or think about some specific questions related to market facilitation that weren't there before. So for the next of this session, we'll just talk a little bit about the indicators and monitoring frameworks that we can use to measure SanMark. So we've outlined 4 here. The core indicators, the supply indicators, demand side indicators, and equity, and finally market system, ecosystem monitoring. So in core outcomes, what do we need to measure? Well, obviously, as we've said, our core outcome that we want to achieve is increases in improved latrine uptake and usage among target populations. Again, as I said, we're usually not going for 100%. We're looking for, incremental improvements in latrine uptake at household level. So some of the questions we'll need to ask ourselves are, how are these interventions accelerating access? And who is accessing these services? Are we reaching the poor and the poorest with our marketing interventions? So example indicators are given on the right. And I've highlighted in red those that are really critical that we must measure. So percentage increase in improved latrine coverage. This should be stated over and above a nothing rate of increase. So we want to know if we are increasing improved latrine coverage more than would have been increased in a do-nothing scenario. We want to know the percentage of households that are actually using the latrine facilities that they install, and perhaps most importantly, we want to know what percentage of identified poor households are accessing improved latrines. Finally, at this point here, the number of 100% improved coverage in usage communities, and I think it's pretty exciting. It's very early days, but we're starting to see that with CS and CATS together with sanitation marketing, we're seeing villages that are reaching 100% improved coverage in usage, which kind of demonstrates the point these two connect together quite well. So outcome indicators must be measured in any program. How do we measure them? Well, there's an opportunity, as we've said, to build on and leverage the existing CATS monitoring frameworks and ODS protocols in our countries. But it's very important that we distinguish between monitoring community-wide ODF status and monitoring household improved latrine ownership. These are two really different goals, and we want to be careful that don't as we start to include SanMark in CAT's framework, that we don't go back to counting latrines. That would be getting away from the spirit of CAT. So our systems can work within CAT, but we don't want to divert attention away from this tracking of ODF achievement. And we're going to keep the focus of CAT where it should be, which is on ODF for all in the community. So, so just some ideas about how we might go about measuring household assets within CAT's programs. Well, some household level data on latrine ownership is collected during the triggering process, particularly in the later stages where we're doing action planning and making a community plan. So this is a really great opportunity to identify households with improved and unimproved latrines. We can also opportunity to identify the poor households in the community, which is already done during mapping. The data we collect at this stage can be used for SanMark baseline. So we don't have to focus too much on data collection during the initial mapping or ignition stages of triggering, but we do want to take the opportunity to start to understand at baseline which households have improved and unimproved latrines and which households have no latrine at all. So in terms of who can measure, these types of indicators can and quite often already are being tracked by sanitation committees alongside ODF progress. So a couple of examples of how this works on the ground. So this is an example from the STBM program in Indonesia, which has been fairly deliberate about combining a total sanitation approach with sanitation marketing. Here's an example community map from one of the communities in Indonesia. You can see it's a fairly detailed map, but it does outline the improved and unimproved latrines as well as poorer households in the community, and then households without any facilities and those with shared facilities. So this becomes the monitoring tool, as we know. It just has a little bit more detail maybe than some other CLPS maps. So how does, in STM, they made an interesting choice kind of early on because they were trying to combine CLPS with sanitation marketing. They used an additional monitoring tool, which you can see in the photo there. It's a thumbs up. It translates to my latrine is improved. And this sticker was placed outside of people's homes that had an improved latrine, and a different sticker, a different color, was used for those with improved latrines, and then those with no latrine at all had no sticker. We can get into this more in the discussion, but this approach had some mixed results. There's no hard evidence, but we do know that in STBM there was a bit of counting latrines as opposed to monitoring ODF status, and we just want to be careful here that this type of monitoring doesn't stigmatize communities and take focus away from ODF monitoring. But anyway, it's just an example that I hope we can talk about a bit later on. So once the community data was mapped and communities are making progress, sanitation committees are monitoring, what happens then in the STBM program is a sanitarian who is a government staff goes down and once a month makes a progress report by SMS, text message, on the status of the communities in their area. which gets uploaded in real time to the STBM monitoring database. And I've just pulled a screenshot of the database here, but as you can see, the baseline figures are tracked for improved latrines, JSP, unimproved, JS, SSP, sharing, and then BA, BS there on the right is for open defecators. So you can see this this monitoring data is uploaded in real time, and you can download it in Excel or PDF. So it's an interesting blend for use of ITC as a way of tracking progress against these core outcomes, which is worthwhile looking into for at-scale programs. Example here from Ministry of Health, Benin. This is in a program that was not looking at cats, but using a similar type of mapping approach for monitoring. So you can see in the diagram a volunteer village health promoter makes a map of all the compounds in the village, and then maps out which ones have started constructing a latrine. So you can see in the inset there, the circle with the red dot is a newly constructed latrine. So in this compound, there are 2 newly constructed latrines. The half circle is a half, partially constructed latrine, and the X's there you can see are the number of times that the village health volunteer has gone to do promotions in that compound. So you can see they've gone there twice. So these are ways that that mapping can be used to track household progress towards latrine construction. So moving on now to supply-side monitoring or business monitoring. As we said, this is really the new dimension, I think, for sanitation marketing that wasn't there before. In terms of this more dimension, we're looking at the objective will really be to improve the supply of affordable, desirable, and quality products. So the types of questions we're looking to answer on the supply side are: how are the products and services improving to meet consumers' needs? Are the supply chain businesses increasing availability of the products and services to underserved low-income populations, to our target, not just to anybody? How financially sustainable and viable are the businesses? Will they continue doing this after our program interventions cease? And what are the characteristics of high-performing businesses amongst all businesses we work with? Who's doing the best and why? And what are their incentives to enter the business and to expand service provision to harder to reach places? So just some example indicators here. There's a more exhaustive list of sample indicators in the guidance notes, but I've just highlighted a few here that are of particular importance. As Therese mentioned early on, measuring new sales will be important, and we'll want to do this cumulatively as well as monthly. We'll want to know the average number of villages that can be reached by each business, so we can understand their geographic scale. We'll want to know things about the percentage increase in latrine sales per business above the baseline. So, for example, if they were selling 3 latrines before, now they're selling 15 latrines, they'll be making more sales revenue. And another really key indicator for us will be tracking the cash and resource investments in latrine-related businesses. So we want to know, are they spending more money on equipment and tools? Are they investing in extra staff? Are they bringing on new laborers? All of these things are exactly what we're hoping to see happen in the new sanitation market. We want to see private businesses leveraging and making an investment in servicing new communities. There are some other indicators that are a bit less important but still interesting, particularly this idea of a multiplier effect. So in an ordinary or more straightforward small business program, you'd always look at, what are local economic returns on latrine sales? So are we creating new jobs? Are we creating new types of revenue in the community that will be on spend. So how do we measure supply side indicators? Well, in two ways. I think the first key area that we'll want to look at is sales monitoring. So this is just purely tracking the number of new latrine facilities that are sold or constructed, or any services that are provided by each of the program supported businesses. The second area that we'll want to look at is related to the business profile. So this is how are the partner businesses evolving their operations over time? Are they growing? Are they changing in any way? So the way we want to measure sales is to understand if our promotional activities are effective. That's one important thing. But there are a number of other things. We want to measure and understand different external factors. So season demand, transport, labor availability. How are these external factors impacting on sales? This will help us to plan and budget our activities better. And we can also help guide the businesses. For example, if there are times of the year when we know there'll be a spike in demand, for example, after the harvest, businesses can stock up and begin to produce before that time so that they're ready to meet demand. Another critical thing that sales monitoring will help us to understand is those areas that are still neglected by businesses. So even after our SanMark interventions start, there may still be areas that are just too difficult to get to, or transport costs are very high, or etc. These areas of low profitability may still be neglected by businesses, so we may need additional support to reach them on the programmatic side. Again, as we said, we can look at success factors of the high-performing businesses so that we can understand, well, if we're bringing new businesses into the system, what do we look for? How do we make sure our selection process is strong? And what kinds of business support are needed to help businesses succeed? And then really just monitoring and regular reporting of the sales data can kind of motivate and incentivize businesses. You know, it makes a little bit of healthy competition. You can reward high achievers. They don't not necessarily through monetary rewards, but you know, through recognition of high sales or this type of thing, and that helps to create a bit of buzz around sanitation sales. In terms of the tools that we would use for sales monitoring, you know, first and foremost, the sales monitoring is about improving overall business management. We want these businesses to tracking their own sales so that they can get better at doing business. So the tools that we develop have to be simple enough that a business can use them and that a business is motivated to use them because they can see the benefits of tracking their sales. So micro businesses, like, you know, very small masons or builders, this might, you know, be picture-based tracking tools, simple tallies, perhaps verbal reporting at regular meetings. But you know, if we're working with businesses that are illiterate or semi-literate, we'll need to adapt tools that they can use. For small or medium businesses, you know, such as concrete producers or larger masons, we might be able to use paper-based tools such as sales record books or purchase orders. And then if we're working with larger scale firms, manufacturers or wholesalers, they'll already have their own, usually electronic systems for tracking their own sales. This will usually be at a higher level. So we need to work with them to make sure that at the end of each month or the end of each quarter, we can get from them the sales data or the relevant data we'll need for our program reporting. This is probably more of a case-by-case basis that we'll need to kind of work with the larger firms to develop the right tools. So for business profiling, again, there are some really clear benefits to tracking businesses over time. Firstly, we can track their revenue and profits, the investments that they make, and their geographic expansion. we want to see them reaching more villages over time. We can benchmark individual businesses within the network, and then critically, we can also determine whether or not the business model is viable in the long term. So we might find that some of the strategies or interventions that we've tried, they might be working now, but it could become very clear that that once the program stops, the business probably wouldn't continue doing latrine sales. And then, of course, understanding the incentives and what's needed to get a business out to the harder to reach population. So some of the tools that we'll use for business profiling are, basically, you'll want to develop a simple survey tool, and you'll collect some basic details on each business when you first engage them. So we've already outlined some steps for that in guidance notes 3 and 4, but basically you want some information about their location, the products and services they already offer, the prices of those offerings, what kind of sales they are already doing in sanitation, what kind of revenue they already make, the tools and equipment they already have, the number of staff they have. And then as they engage in the program, you can also take a record of the initial upfront investments that they make for the new sanitation business line. Once you have this basic data, you can enter it into your sales database, and you don't need to upload or update profiles very often, but you go back and update profiles annually just to see how these businesses are changing. Once you have the basic information, you'll be able to take a look at different business profiles against their sales records for the month. Let's take a look at how some of this might look in practice. So here's an example from Watershed, Cambodia. You can see the main picture here is just a snapshot of the English translation of the sales order record book that they use. This record book is given to each concrete producer in their system. They have about 150 concrete producers they're working with so far. You can see the information they fill in there. So basically what happens is the concrete producers have sales agents that go out and take purchase orders. The inset there is the purchase order receipt. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to read, but you can see there's a purchase order that's filled in during the village sales event. It's filled in carbon copy. So the consumer keeps one receipt, and the sales agent keeps one receipt, and the sales agent gives one receipt to the business. The business then takes a note in their record book, their sales record book of the consumer name, village, district, sales agent, and the details of the product purchased, including the date that it was delivered. So at the end of the month, the Watershed Programmatic staff go around and they take one carbon copy, which is torn from the sales record book, and they keep one copy, and the main sales record sheet in the book stays with the enterprise. Feedback on these types of tools has been really great in terms of businesses before they worked with the program really had no idea of what kind of sales they were doing. Now that they keep records, they can down to the real what they're making each month in terms of sales revenue. So they like it as well. So how is this then fed into the programmatic database? Well, here you can just see a snapshot of the overall program sales record. So you can see this I just pulled off the Watershed's website. They keep this uploaded and updated regularly each month on their website. And you can see the monthly sales records by province. So this is all businesses in their network and how many latrines they sell per month. The thing that I want to point out here really is the two red circles here. You can see pretty clearly there's an impact of seasonal sales. You know, the red circles highlighted here are the low season, the rainy season in Cambodia, where there's much fewer sales and much less activity. You know, as we, in Watershed, as they started to get an understanding of seasonal sales, they really adjusted their whole campaign, and the business and the network really do adjust their production and distribution based on this seasonality. Here's another example also from Cambodia, from the IDE program. It's just a result by enterprise. So again, this is showing latrine sales by enterprise. So the left-hand side, the orange bar shows the cumulative sales per enterprise, and then the blue line there shows the average sales per enterprise per month. And you can see there that the interesting finding, I think, when we were doing the evaluation, we really noticed one enterprise alone accounted for about 1/3 of all latrine sales. So, you know, when you start to look at that type of data, you say, well, what makes that enterprise so different from the rest? What is he doing? And then you go and interview him, and you can find out what are his secrets to success. You can take enterprises to see his workplace and learn from him, because he was obviously doing something right. So tracking this type of data can really help to strengthen your strategies. Here again is an example of a business profile. Again, these are kind of updated regularly on Watershed Cambodia's website. You can see this, the type of data that they track here. You know, they're looking at, you know, when did they join the program, how many toilet sales did they sell before the program, and how many can they sell now, how much are they investing. So you can see in the case of Chen Cross, he's already invested $6,500 in his latrine business. That was mainly for a delivery truck that he bought through a microfinance loan. And then here's another example from Malawi. You can see they've mapped here a number of businesses against the dimensions that you see there in the left-hand column. In the Water for People program, it's a service-oriented type businesses. So these are pit emptiers and pit digging and sludge removal. So you can see there on the left-hand side, those are some of the things that they're looking at. How much can each of these businesses make for each of these activities, and what's their total revenue and profit? So these types of supply side measurements can be done by a number of actors. You know, they might be done by local government, NGO partners, business development, service providers. It really depends on the roles and capacities within your SanMark program. And it also depends on the types of business that you're working with. I would say just generally, it's best to avoid using natural leaders or catch facilitators for this type of monitoring. This can really be done by programmatic staff or by staff outside of the village level who aren't engaged at kind of community level motivating for ODS. So just quickly moving through the last 2 points, so I'm going a little bit over time here. The third area that we want to look at is demand side monitoring for equity in particular. So again, what are we looking at? The more dimension is demand, and we want to see increased consumer demand and investment in improved sanitation. So the types of questions that we're asking are, you know, how do SanMark interventions increase awareness, intention, and motivation to invest? How effective and sustainable are the demand creation and promotional activities? How are financial barriers to investment being addressed? This might be through the market, but it also might be through complementary financing mechanisms, as Mimi discussed in last week's webinar. So some example again would relate to the percentage of households that have purchased. Of households who have purchased, how many have fully installed the new facilities, and how many are properly using the new facilities. We can track, you know, what percentage of households are intending to purchase, if they're satisfied with their latrine purchase, and so on. On the bottom, I've highlighted one important indicator. We want to know the number of poor households that are accessing improved products through alternative financing mechanisms, but this will probably require a separate set of measuring and monitoring frameworks that accompany any alternative financing mechanisms that we might trial. So how do we measure this? These types of demand side indicators, related to intention and satisfaction, are best done through household surveys and focus groups, and it doesn't need to be done very often. So you might do a baseline, and then you might follow up annually, or even biannually to track progress. In terms of household survey, focus groups you could probably do often, and focus groups tend to tell us a lot about changes that we might need to make to the product and service offering. So, of course, we can find out if our promotional messages are effective. We can find out if we need to change something about the product. So, for example, if we're finding that people are really dissatisfied because the product is difficult to install, then we might need to look at ways to make installation easier. And then just generally, we can track the overall changes in the market size. So if we ask households at baseline, what would you intend to purchase a latrine in the next 12 months, and then we go back a year later and ask the same question, we want to know, is demand or intention to purchase growing, or are we reaching market saturation? But more importantly, for household surveys, this is really how we'll get at this issue of equity. So this annual household surveys will tell us how the poor and the poorest are participating in the new sanitation market. So it includes standard poverty and vulnerability indicators in our baseline survey. And if we do that, then we will be able to disaggregate outcomes, and we'll be able to say for each wealth income quintile, what percentage have been able to access and purchase a new product through the market. You can also do a fair bit with focus groups. So if we arrange focus groups with identified poor households, we can find out in more detail whether or not the market is reaching them and what can be done to better reach this segment. So this is a really critical and an important part of the program. And finally, the market ecosystem monitoring. So again, we're looking at the enabling environment Moore's dimension, and we're looking specifically at a subset of the enabling environment, which looks at how we can increase the ability to facilitate and regulate the market. So some key questions we're looking at are, is the local government increasing capacity? Are they able to monitor, facilitate, and regulate the new market? Are the necessary policies and resources in place? How are the local government and other partners supporting businesses to expand services to these lower income segments? And is external technical support demand-driven? Are local governments asking for help in these areas? And is there an exit strategy for this external technical support? So, as you know, enabling environment is more difficult to measure because it involves qualitative changes that can be somewhat difficult to objectively measure. So I've highlighted a few in red here. Again, there's a broader list in the guidance note, but things like understanding the quality and extent of the market facilitation mechanism. What are governments actually doing on the ground to support small businesses? What are they doing to ensure that quality is good and that prices are fair? Of course, we look at what percentage of their budget at different levels are they allocating to sanitation activities. you know, because these types of indicators can be a little bit more challenging to monitor, it's usually done through, you know, subjective evaluations, so ranking, scoring, benchmarking. I'm sure you will have seen the CSO reports for Africa, where we're looking, you know, at being a baseline of how a country is doing against enabling environment dimensions, and then measuring changes over time by asking stakeholders about what they think. So here's a practical example on a smaller scale from Water for People, Malawi. So what they did was they just brought together a bunch of key stakeholders in a room, and they looked at 11 key functions related to sanitation market ecosystems. You know, so this involves monitoring, service provision, access finance, business support, and so on. And what they did is they brought people in the room and they asked which actor is most responsible for this job, and how well is this actor doing at this job. So I've just taken a snapshot from the report there, Sparkman 2013, on demand creation. So they asked this questionnaire about how effective and self-sustainable demand creation activities were, and then they ranked the actors that they thought were most involved in this, and different groups, different actors, and they came up with a final score of 3 out of 4, indicating that there's some good progress being made, but there's more support that can be used. This example from Water for People ecosystem mapping is interesting because I think it points us in the direction of some of the questions we should ask, but also once we've kind of assigned some value to different actors and different functions, then we can sort of say, okay, well, what types of SanMark interventions are needed, and where are we not needed at all? So sorry, that was a bit of a lengthy presentation. I'm sure a lot of questions. So we'll take about maybe 20 minutes now and answer some questions. I'd really like to hear from you all about examples of existing programs or your plans for monitoring these different types of indicators, and also any potential pitfalls you can see or problems that might relate to measuring improved coverage changes within your CATS framework and what we might do to mitigate this risk. So I'll hand over to Emily now, and if you could raise your hand or type in the chat box, and we'll try and get some conversation.
Hi, so can you just raise your hand if you have a comment or question, and we'll open your mic for you. Feel free to just use the chat box instead. I think Ian Jones has a question. Okay, your mic's open.
Hello, good morning. This is Ian Jones from the Guyana office. Now, what's in Guyana is that earlier this year there was a gastroenteritis outbreak in the interior. And it's very much likely to have been caused by bad sanitation situation because of a lot of new settlements and building on existing settlements because of the gold rush into the interior area. Now, last week in Parliament they voted to have a commission of inquiry onto the causes of the actual outbreak. So I think that there's going to be lots of opportunities for participation, especially from the UN system, ourselves, and PAHO, especially with hygiene promotion. We had provided a lot of materials for emergency wash and hygiene promotion activities. So I'm just wondering what kind of indicators, first of all, which we could maybe use within the outcomes of the Commission of Inquiry, and as we further look toward advocating for resilience projects. Thank you.
A lot into your question. In fact, if it's okay, I might pass this one to Therese, who might be able to speak on some of the indicators that you might look at as you move into trying to understand more about the outbreak. Therese, did you want to?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Danielle, and thanks, Ian, and good to hear what's currently happening in Guyana. I think probably the first place that I would recommend you go to is the new cholera toolkit, because it has lots of links to monitoring frameworks, monitoring forms, key activities, and there wouldn't be a lot of difference between a gastro outbreak and what we do for a gastro outbreak before, during, and after, and what we do for cholera. So that's probably a good one-stop shop. We can send you the link. It's online, but all resources basically and links to all resources are in that. And then if you want to connect with me directly, we can see what the best support can give you, and maybe what the gaps are that you'd like us to sort of talk about. But I think there's lots of opportunities and there's lots of information out there.
Great. If anyone has any other reflections or examples or questions, just feel free to type in the chat box or raise your hand.
Danielle, if I may, I have a question. Within UNICEF, we don't really implement as part of projects. We work slightly different than an NGO in the fact that we're part of a large-scale country program. So quite often, monitoring or the number of questions we can add to a survey would be restricted, because there's household surveys going on, but they have questions on, HIV/AIDS and child protection and health, and wash is just one manner. So if there was 2 or 3 key indicators that we should routinely collect on the marketing. I'm not talking about detailed studies on the sanitation marketing, but I'm talking about the broader scale annual type reporting. What would be those 1 or 2 things that you would advise countries? This is the absolute, must-have data that will really help you. Then you can always facilitate your more detailed focus groups and interventions in different areas. But it's just to put into the UNICEF context a little bit.
I don't think that the SanMark is so different from other sanitation missions. In terms of the core outcome indicators, what you already cover in your mail is enough. Just tracking improved coverage is the most critical thing. So a lot of the stuff is about understanding trends within, on the supply sort of thing, which they are nice to have. But what we want to see is that we're having an impact. Our market-based interventions are having an impact on overall increase in improved uptake, so accelerated of beyond baseline. So to give you to give a concrete example, UNICEF and WHO already track, through the GMP these types of changes, and we already know that at baseline, or do nothing scenario, the market is already having a huge impact on increasing improved coverage. we need to start interventions at a country level, accelerating that. So if at country level, if we're seeing 1% increase in sanitation coverage, well, working at scale with the market, we want to see acceleration over and above 1%. So in fact, this is the thing. It doesn't really require new answers at the, in terms of core outcomes. But I might pass over to Mimi as well. If Mimi, you want to think on what is the most essential.
Okay, Mimi, your mic's open.
Okay, you might have made me there. Does that address your question?
Absolutely, it's great. It's just to say to people online, as you know, we do the mix and the DHS, so multiple indicator cluster, demographic health surveys, or whatever the equivalent is. And I think what I'm hearing is that we won't need to add additional questions to those global household surveys. What we're doing under sanitation, which is measuring open defecation and improved sanitation and stuff as it is, will actually give us the top line data that we would require. Then specific monitoring on specific project sites is more detailed, like Danielle has presented earlier. I think there's a couple of questions in the chat box as well.
So we have a question from Moochie, and she's asking, when do we measure the proper use of improved facilities by households?
Yeah, Moochie, that's a great question. I mean, again, I think this type of measurement is already happening within CATS. So as I understand, in most countries, you'd be looking to make sure that households are not defecating in the open, and oftentimes this will involve sort of checking at household level to see that facilities are in use, as measured by observable indicators, not seeing feces on the ground and seeing a well-worn path to the latrine and so on. So I think this again should be part of standard sort of village level monitoring already, and there's no need for anything new here. So I think the best course of action would be to build this in or strengthen your existing post-triggering and post-ODF monitoring protocols. So nothing new there.
We have a question from Aidan, and he says, often we try to work through government to strengthen government systems, and they have set formats for their IMIS systems. What could be advocacy line for SanMark indicators for settings with and without subsidies?
That's a great question, Aidan. I think, again, as I said, I mean, the core outcomes that we want to see in sanitation marketing are no different to any other program. I mean, I think that the main difference is actually related to the fact that with CATS we're looking more at ODF communities, and in SanMark, you're a little bit more back to the more standard sort of household level measurements. I think in terms of advocating for sanitation marketing monitoring or if you're able to track on the supply side some of these changes, you'll really be able to build up a pretty good evidence base pretty quickly. So for example, on the supply side, I've got data from Cambodia that shows exactly what happened to latrine sales when a subsidy project started in a particular province. They just fell off completely. So you can, let's say you have 5 businesses that are busy working away, increasing their latrine sales. a subsidy program comes in, and and you can see, very clearly that all those sales, disappear, and you're pretty much back to square one. So on the supply side, I mean, that type of monitoring is quite powerful in terms of educating governments on the effect that subsidies can have on dampening demand. So that's why I think that's probably interesting from an advocacy perspective. For areas without subsidy, I think again some of the information that you can track that I've outlined in the presentation could be used to show progressive growth of latrine sales over time, and build a case for demand creation activities on the government side. So I think that's the point. We're saying to government, invest in demand creation, invest in creating behavior change, and let businesses do the supply side. Actually, Aidan, I might ask you if you wanted to add a little bit more about what you had in mind in terms of advocacy.
Aidan, mic's open.
Hi, can you hear me?
You hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the very good answer. Really, it was the point I think that you touched upon on how subsidies can dampen the demand, and I mean, obviously here in India we have a strong subsidy government program with I mean, that has its own dynamics in terms of sanitation marketing. So I mean, we can advocate with the government here, and we have in the past to change their monitoring formats, and we use often concurrent monitoring systems with them. So I mean, my taking point, what you're saying is that I think it's at that level we can look influence and then build up theory and build up evidence to then go at higher levels and eventually probably to state and national level. So yeah, that was my reflection really. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aidan. If anyone has any more questions, just raise your hands.
I have just a question for the group. How do some of these things that we've been discussing relate to this issue of cat sustainability? And I was learning a little bit about these sustainability checks annually at UNICEF. How do you think all of this this type of work fits into this issue of making sure we're sustaining the gains from cats? So I see comments come in from Dave. So India sanitation program is guided by the national program with subsidy as the key driver, and there's a national MIS to collect and report information which doesn't measure ODS, and our role is limited to policy and strategies to enable them to implement it better. SanMark is fascinating, however, in government is more supply-driven than demand, and the challenge is to influence their MIS and introduce these indicators. I mean, when it comes to India, it's pretty problematic, and I would say that what you're already doing makes the most sense, which is to try and get ODS communities and measurement on tracking of ODS communities on the radar is going to be much more important than any of these other sanitation marketing type of indicators, to be perfectly honest. But that's my kind of without knowing very deeply about that.
Oh, and Therese has her hand raised. Therese, your mic's open.
Thanks, Emily. Just to come in on your comment on the sustainability checks. Our colleagues in Africa will be more familiar with them than in Asia, and these are basically third-party monitoring systems where the equivalent of a PricewaterhouseCoopers or another agency come in and basically check the status annually, so 12 months, if you like, post-intervention. And I think this will be as applicable to sanitation marketing as it will to our ongoing CATS programs, because what it currently helps us determine is slippage rates, or what we call slippage rates. So if we have an ODF community this week, this time next year, are 100% of people in that community still, is that community still open defecation free? And if we're looking at whether or not they're using improved facilities, and we put that into the check, then I think that will help us determine how successful we're being, not just in our promotion but in greater uptake. Because quite often what happens is that once we move from a district or from a village or from a community, we don't often have the opportunity to go back and do detailed monitoring. And I think the sustainability checks allows us to look at continuity and sustainability over time. And as part of all of our and DFID-funded projects, so probably about 20 countries or 30 countries now are implementing sustainability checks.
Sorry, Danielle, there's just a comment from Gibson as well, saying the sustainability checks could incorporate the indicators from the sanitation marketing.
Gavin, I think that's exactly what I was just going to say. Obviously, open opportunities. This type of stuff, it doesn't need to be tracked all the time. So the sustainability check, if it's an annual type of thing, would be the more appropriate avenue to go in terms of, especially some of these household level changes. I think there's a lot of knowledge perhaps at the moment on the supply side when it comes to TLCS and CATS, and we'll get into this more next week in terms of what do we still know. But certainly building some of these types of indicators in might help a lot. Okay, I think I might press on if there are no further questions, and or if something comes to mind, just type it in the chat box. Just a few more slides on some tips for UNICEF as you go ahead and start thinking about how SanMark might fit into your programs. I think the main tip is that we'd be building on the existing monitoring efforts that we already have. So we have community monitoring efforts within CAT programs that are embedded within communities and government systems. And then you also have these broader sort of national NICS and DHS surveys. Really, none of this needs to change to be able to measure and track outcomes around improved latrine coverage. This outcome level monitoring should just be part of the work. It can just be part of the broader work that you're already doing. And of course, monitoring is a very huge topic. It's one that I know UNICEF is involved in at every level, in every country. It's problematic, and there are a lot of issues along the way. So what we don't want to do is, adding lots and lots of new indicators, and we don't want to be duplicating efforts. At the start, when it comes to sanitation marketing, you might go a little bit heavy on monitoring, or you might ask partner agencies or supporting sort of implementing partners to track some things just so that you can see how things are going, and then over time really those outcome indicators. So just be careful that we're not duplicating efforts or doubling up on indicators, and just make sure that we're building on existing community level monitoring systems. If you have a separate sort of partner agency that you're contracting or hiring to do a piece of SanMark, just make sure that they're building on the existing common government framework and procedures and ODS protocols that already exist, and that SanMark doesn't become like a separate standalone type project, because it's not a project-based approach. And again, we just need to think about then how this type of data will be fed into the existing government databases. So the second tip is really just around a sales and business database. I mean, this is really the new area in SanMark. It's really around this issue of actually tracking what's happening on the supply side. What you might want to do is just recruit, some technical input from a BDS provider, someone who that has experience with small business development, so that you can make sure you design and test sales and business monitoring tools that work for them, for the businesses. To be perfectly honest, if you have good tools that you can train businesses to use, they will do it. And you might find when your program stops and you go back, a year later, that they're still using them because they're vital for their business. And that's what you want. You want these tools to have a life of their own within a business. So you can develop those types of tools as part of your business development and training activities early on in the program. And so ongoing collection of sales monitoring data from businesses can be done, by local government or other partners. But again, I would avoid using natural leaders or CLS facilitators in anything on the supply side. It's not necessary to track these types of indicators at that level. And where it's possible, if you can, if you are working through the local government, if it's possible to map the supply side data, for example, into the existing sort of databases on coverage and ODS, then you'll be able to look at some really interesting trends that might happen over time. And that's more of a nice to have from a researcher perspective, not necessary. And the third tip is really just around budgeting and planning to measure equity, and maybe I would add to that also sustainability. So we just need to know that the impact of the sanitation interventions, whether CAS or SanMark, or what impact they're having on the lives of the poor and the poorest. And we need to track that. So this needs to be tracked over time. So as Therese was saying, when it comes to slippage or sustainability, we don't have a lot of hard data yet, but we do know that quite often those that slip back are probably the poorer and more vulnerable. I just want to make sure that the poor aren't left on the bottom rung of the sanitation ladder, or that they're not the ones that are slipping back. They're the ones that we're trying to reach the most. And then really, just when it comes to tracking equity, UNICEF already has, sounds like, a number of countries with sustainability checks. If you don't, just consider budgeting the extra steps and resources to do that baseline and follow-up monitoring to track access by income or wealth quintile. So that's it. I see just one question from Ma'am, that in Burkina Faso there's a national program for monitoring sanitation through MIS and annual review. I think Mariam, you got cut off there. But yeah, I mean, there's opportunities and creative things happening, with ITC and so on. And monitoring is a big topic, and the key is keeping it simple. So wherever possible, it should be about strengthening existing systems, building on them and trying not to overload already overburdened government systems with lots of indicators that might not be tracked all the time. So I might just wrap up there. Were there any last questions before we close? Okay, in that case, want to remind everyone, so we have had a small schedule change. The final webinar on harmonizing SanMark and CAT has been rescheduled for the 23rd of July for the Africa session and 25th of July for Asia. So just mark in your calendars, and I think there will be a reminder email sent on that. Emily's just the link for the new guidance notes and other uploads on the ICON site, and I think that's it from me. Just want to say thanks again to everybody for the session today and for the discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Danielle. I think a really interesting session, and really important that whether we're implementing or we're starting, that we really look at what it is we need to monitor along the way and how we can actually get that baseline in and data in everything we do. So the session has been recorded. It'll be uploaded in the coming days. There is a guidance note on monitoring that will be coming soon. It's guidance note 9. So watch out for that, and we'll send you a note. And as Danielle said, we have a change in schedule, and the last and very final in the webinar series will take place on the 23rd, 24th, 25th, depending which time zone you're in, and we'll send that out in the July calendar. So thanks to Danielle, thanks to Mimi for joining in from Cambodia late at night, and to Emily for managing the session, and thanks everyone for joining. See you next time. Bye.